Hi guys, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you find this content informative, please subscribe to the channel for more updates. A'ja Wilson was supposedly removed from Team USA after a heated confrontation with Caitlin Clark. Within days, the story began spreading across social media like it was already confirmed. Fans were debating what happened, why Wilson had allegedly been pulled, and whether one of the biggest rivalries in women's basketball had finally gone too far. But there was a major problem. The official Team USA roster did not support the story. When USA Basketball announced its 2026 Women's World Cup roster, both A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark were included. There was no reported removal of Wilson, no official announcement about a confrontation, and no public evidence confirming that the two stars had a dramatic falling out. The uploaded competitor transcript also identifies this exact contradiction between the viral rumor and the announced roster. So where did the rumor come from? The answer goes back months earlier when Wilson made comments about protecting the history of women's basketball. She talked about not losing the recipe and warned that the contributions of players who helped build the league could be forgotten or erased. She never directly named Caitlin Clark in those remarks. Still, the timing was enough to ignite speculation. Clark had become one of the biggest stars in basketball, bringing enormous attention, record-breaking interest, and a massive new fan base to the WNBA. Some Clark supporters interpreted Wilson's comments as criticism of the rookie superstar, while others argued that Wilson was simply defending the history of the league. Then social media did what it does best. A complicated conversation about the growth and history of women's basketball was transformed into a simple rivalry. A'ja Wilson versus Caitlin Clark. And once that narrative caught fire, the next claim was even bigger, that the tension had exploded behind the scenes and forced Wilson out of Team USA. Except the roster told a completely different story. And that is where this story gets much more interesting. The entire A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark controversy can be traced back to a few words that, at first, didn't sound like a personal attack at all. In October 2025, after Wilson was named Time's Athlete of the Year, she spoke about the history of women's basketball and the players who helped build the league long before its current explosion in popularity. Wilson emphasized the importance of not losing the recipe and said the league's history had been erased for a minute. She never directly named Caitlin Clark. But that didn't stop people from connecting the dots. Clark had become the biggest new name in the WNBA, bringing enormous attention, new viewers, packed arenas, and intense social media interest. For some fans, Wilson's comments sounded like a warning that the league's past stars were being overlooked because of the attention surrounding Clark. And suddenly, a broader conversation about recognizing the women who built the WNBA became a story about two individual superstars. That interpretation quickly spread online. Parts of Clark's fan base pushed back, questioning why Wilson appeared to be directing the conversation toward Clark when Clark hadn't been mentioned by name. Wilson later stood by the broader point she was making while objecting to how her comments had been characterized. That distinction is crucial. The available record shows a veteran superstar talking about preserving league history. It does not establish that Wilson publicly attacked Clark or that the two had a confirmed personal feud. But social media rarely rewards nuance. Once the quote was connected to Clark, every interaction between the two suddenly had a new meaning. A shared bench could become evidence of tension. Silence could become evidence of hostility, and an ordinary roster decision could suddenly be interpreted as the result of a secret confrontation. One comment had created an entire storyline. But the strangest part was what happened next, because for the next several months the supposed rivalry never actually escalated publicly. What started as a conversation about the history of women's basketball somehow became a rivalry between two players who had never publicly declared themselves rivals. That transformation happened because Caitlin Clark's arrival in the WNBA changed the scale of attention surrounding the league. Her games attracted enormous audiences, her jersey became one of the most recognizable in women's basketball, and every development involving her generated intense discussion online. For many fans, Clark represented a new era. But for veteran players, there was also a larger question. Would the spotlight on the newest superstar cause the players and generations that came before her to be forgotten? That was the broader issue surrounding A'ja Wilson's comments. Wilson spoke about preserving the league's history and recognizing the women who had endured difficult moments to build the WNBA. The transcript makes clear that she did not specifically accuse Clark of anything, yet parts of Clark's fan base interpreted the remarks through the lens of Clark's unprecedented popularity. From there, the internet simplified a complicated debate. Instead of asking whether the WNBA could celebrate Clark's impact while still honoring its veterans, the conversation became, is A'ja Wilson against Caitlin Clark? Every detail could then be pulled into that storyline. A comment became a shot, silence became tension, different perspectives became personal dislike. But there was another problem. The two players had already shared the court before the controversy, including as teammates during the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game. The transcript notes that they were on the same All-Star squad months before Wilson's controversial comments. That doesn't prove what either player privately thinks. But it does show something important. The public record never established the dramatic rivalry that social media eventually imagined. And once that distinction is understood, the viral story starts looking very different. There's one major problem with the viral story about A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark. The evidence never catches up with the claim. The rumor suggests that Wilson and Clark had a heated confrontation that became serious enough for Wilson to be removed from Team USA's World Cup roster. That sounds dramatic. It also sounds like the kind of story that would generate headlines instantly. But when you look at what is actually documented, that version starts falling apart. The official roster announcement included both Wilson and Clark. There was no documented announcement saying Wilson had been removed because of Clark, and the competitor transcript itself points out that the supposed blow-up does not appear in the official record. And that creates an important distinction. Something being repeated thousands of times online doesn't make it verified. There is a real story underneath the rumor. Wilson really did make comments about preserving the history of women's basketball. The comments really did trigger backlash from sections of Clark's fan base, and the two players really did become connected in a much bigger online conversation. But that is very different from proving that they had a private confrontation. There is also no clear public sequence showing Wilson suddenly turning against Clark, demanding her removal, or refusing to play alongside her. In fact, the record described in the transcript shows something almost opposite. The two had previously shared a team at the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game, and neither player publicly escalated the controversy afterward. So the biggest problem isn't that the rumor is impossible. It's that the public evidence doesn't prove it happened. And that raises an even bigger question. If there was never a confirmed feud, why did so many people become convinced that one existed? Forget the rumor for a second, because there is something much more interesting about A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark sharing the same Team USA roster. Their games actually fit together. Wilson is at her best around the basket. She brings interior scoring, rebounding, physicality, and elite defensive presence. At the 2022 World Cup, she averaged 17.2 points and 7.5 rebounds per game while helping lead Team USA to gold. Clark operates almost completely differently. Her biggest weapon is her ability to create opportunities. She can stretch a defense with her shooting, push the ball, find teammates, and control the offense with her passing. During the 2026 World Cup qualifying tournament, Clark averaged 11.6 points and 6.4 assists per game, leading the tournament in assists. And that's exactly why this pairing could become dangerous. Clark doesn't need to dominate every possession with scoring. She can draw defenders toward the perimeter and create openings inside. Wilson, meanwhile, gives her a target who can punish defenses once the ball reaches the paint. One player creates space and opportunities. The other can finish them. That doesn't guarantee chemistry, of course. International basketball has different rules, different defensive schemes, and far less time for teammates to develop their timing. But from a pure basketball perspective, their skill sets aren't naturally competing for the same role. In fact, the roster appears designed around complementary pieces. established veterans like Wilson, Breena Stewart, and Nafisa Collier alongside younger stars including Clark, Paige Buchers, Angel Reese, and Aaliyah Boston. So while social media has spent months asking whether Wilson and Clark have a problem with each other, the coaching staff has a much simpler question to answer. Can these two help Team USA win? And if the answer is yes, whatever happened online becomes a lot less important once the games begin. Here, where the story gets interesting, after all the backlash, the supposed feud never actually exploded in public. If Wilson and Clark were truly locked in a bitter rivalry, you might expect more comments, more confrontations, or at least some obvious signs of tension. Instead, the public record described in the transcript shows something much quieter. Neither player publicly reopened the controversy or directly escalated the conversation toward the other. Then came another detail that complicated the narrative. At the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game, Wilson and Clark had already shared a team before Wilson's October comments became controversial. They were teammates on the same All-Star squad, meaning the two stars had experience playing alongside each other rather than simply existing as opposing figures in a manufactured rivalry. Months later, another seemingly ordinary moment was pulled into the story. Wilson was photographed at a Miami Heat game where a Caitlin Clark jersey happened to be visible among fans nearby. Some outlets treated the coincidence as another ironic connection between the two stars, but Wilson herself did not publicly react to the jersey or connect the moment to their controversy. Then came the biggest development of all. When the 2026 Team USA World Cup roster was announced, both Wilson and Clark were selected. And when Wilson later discussed representing Team USA, her public comments focused on the gold medal opportunity and the tournament ahead, not on Clark, the old controversy, or any alleged disagreement. That doesn't prove they are best friends. It doesn't prove there was never private tension either. What it does show is much simpler. The public feud never developed into the dramatic confrontation the internet expected. And now, both stars have something far bigger to focus on: winning gold. Maybe the biggest mistake is treating this entire situation as a story about two players. Because A'ja Wilson's original comments were really about something much bigger: who gets remembered when a sport suddenly becomes a cultural phenomenon. Caitlin Clark has brought an extraordinary level of attention to women's basketball. Her arrival created new fans, enormous media interest, and a completely different level of visibility for the WNBA. But the league didn't begin with Clark. Long before her professional debut, veteran players were building careers, competing for championships, and pushing women's basketball forward. That is the tension sitting underneath this entire controversy. Wilson's comments about not losing the league's history were interpreted by some Clark supporters as criticism of the newest superstar. But the broader issue was whether the sport could celebrate Clark's impact without allowing the contributions of previous generations to disappear from the conversation. And that doesn't have to be an either-or situation. Clark can bring millions of new eyes to the game while legends like Wilson receive the recognition they earned. In fact, the growth of women's basketball could give the sport an opportunity to tell more of its history, not less. That is why reducing everything to A'ja versus Caitlin misses the bigger picture. One represents an established generation that helped build the league's foundation. The other represents a new wave capable of taking that foundation somewhere even bigger. And now they are heading into the same Team USA campaign. The irony is impossible to miss. A conversation about whether the past was being forgotten has now placed one of the league's biggest current stars alongside one of its most dominant champions, wearing the same jersey and chasing the same goal. Maybe the real story isn't about choosing between Wilson and Clark. Maybe it's about what happens when the old era and the new era finally share the same court. Now the rumors can finally take a back seat, because Berlin is where the real test begins. The 2026 FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup will bring Team USA to Germany from September 4 through September 13, with the Americans entering the tournament as the defending champions. And that creates a fascinating situation for A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark. For months, social media has tried to turn their relationship into a storyline about tension. But once the games begin, neither player has time to worry about an internet narrative. Every possession has a purpose, every mistake matters, and every teammate has to trust the player next to her. Wilson brings the experience of someone who has already dominated on the international stage. At the 2022 World Cup, she was Team USA's leading scorer and tournament MVP. Now she returns as one of the leaders of a roster chasing another championship. Clark, meanwhile, arrives with something to prove. She was left off the 2024 Olympic roster, a decision that generated enormous debate at the time. But after becoming the MVP of the 2026 World Cup qualifying tournament, she earned another opportunity to establish herself on the senior national team. That makes Berlin more than just another tournament for both players. It becomes a chance to replace speculation with basketball. If Clark finds Wilson repeatedly in the paint, if Wilson finishes passes from Clark, and if both stars celebrate successful possessions together, the internet's rivalry narrative could start looking very different. But if there is tension, Berlin is also the place where pressure could expose it. Nobody outside the two players can know what they privately think. What we can know is this: they are on the same roster, chasing the same gold medal. And when the first whistle blows in Berlin, the only story that matters is whether they can win together.
If you made it this far, you already know this story is far from over. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this changes everything, or are people overreacting? Hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. It really helps push videos like this out to more viewers. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because things are moving fast and there's a lot more coming. I want to hear your take. Does this shift the balance? Or will defenses find another way to respond? Share this video with someone who needs to see this, especially if they've been following this story closely. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when new content drops. If you've got a different perspective, drop it below. I read a lot of the comments and the discussions here are always interesting. Let me know what you think happens next, because this could go in a lot of directions. And if you enjoy content that breaks things down in a simple, engaging way, stick around. There's plenty more on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.